Khan Kubrat, the leader of Great Bulgaria near the end of his life, wanted his 5 sons to continue ruling his realm. He allegedly gathered a bunch of sticks and tasked each of them to attempt to break the whole bunch, but neither of them succeeded. Then he asked them to break the sticks individually, which they managed to do. He said that as long as they stick together, they would not be broken. After the death of Khan Kubrat, his sons learned the lesson and forever remained in Great Bulgaria. Just kidding, they scattered all across Eastern Europe. Asparuh moved west to the Balkans, forming Danubian Bulgaria, the one we have today, but the rest of his brothers tried to establish a Bulgaria somewhere else. You may have heard of Volga, Bulgaria, which was established by Kortak and was fairly successful until the Mongol Empire destroyed it. Batbayan stayed in the original lands of Great Bulgaria, but became no more than a Khazar puppet state. Kuber and Alcek settled in the Pannonian Basin, but after some internal pressure, Kuber moved to the Macedonia region, where he actually created a Bulgarian exclave that existed for a few decades, before it ceased to exist. Alcek went to Italy, near Ravenna, and later moved down near Benevento. After a few decades, they eventually assimilated, as their numbers were greatly diminished and not enough to form a strong and independent nation. The final expedition that is debated if it ever happened, but this video is already going to be so insane, so why not include it as well, is the Vund Expedition, which allegedly set out in Lake Van, but their fate was similar to Alcek's Bulgaria in Italy, where they couldn't really form a separate country, and ended up assimilating with the Armenians, and this if we believe the sources. In total there were 6 Bulgarias. Danubian Bulgaria and Volga Bulgaria were the most successful, existing for centuries. Kuber's Bulgaria existed for a few decades, but still fell. Batbayan's Bulgaria became a Khazar Vassal. Alcek's Bulgaria and the Vund Expedition were too out there and had no real chance at success, with their numbers being too few to create something meaningful. You know, I love Bulgaria so much I'd rather have 6 of them. So let me change all of this and make all of these expeditions succeed, which would have massive implications, including an absolute gigantic Bulgaria in the 7th to 9th century, but I would cover this possibility a bit later. Now, since Danubian Bulgaria and Volga Bulgaria succeeded historically, I'm not going to cover them right now, as there wouldn't be any meaningful changes to them. So instead I would cover the failed expedition and how we can make them succeed, and what happens after that. The Kuber expedition had a real shot at forming a country in the Macedonia region. That is, if they survived, they could unite with Danubian Bulgaria. Kuber and Asparuh, the 2 rulers, would be brothers, and likely they're going to merge their realms eventually, or at least not oppose each other. Both countries would also rule over the same people, which is Bulgars, Slavs and local tribes. Originally, the Kuber expedition set out in Pannonia into the Avar Khaganate, where they were allowed to settle, but due to high tribute needed to be paid and the heavy Avar authority, the Bulgars led by Kuber migrated south to Macedonia, and this was after the establishment of Danubian Bulgaria. The Byzantine Empire originally welcomed the Kuber expedition, granting them some lands to settle, hoping to subjugate them later and use their forces as a buffer against the Slavs and the Avars. This would prove to be a big mistake, as Kuber didn't want to be a mere Byzantine vassal state, but wanted his own independent state. So in the late 7th century he began plotting to seize the city of Thessaloniki, the second biggest Byzantine city, as he wanted to make it his capital. The reason for this is because Kuber's Bulgaria had no real administrative center, where the political elite could rule from, and Kuber's Bulgaria had basically no way of collecting taxes, so getting Thessaloniki was a do or die for his nation. This attempt to seize Thessaloniki is only documented in detail in Bulgarian sources, which could be flawed and biased, but here is how the story goes. There was a person called Mauros that was very loyal to Kuber, likely being the second in command and the most prominent advisor to Kuber, and they plotted to take the city. Maurus went to the city alone, presenting himself as a refugee from Kuber's Bulgaria and accepted to be a subject of Byzantium, where he asked for help to save the people fleeing from Kuber's Bulgaria. This was the basic plan. Maurus secures the trust of the Byzantines, and many Bulgars would be allowed inside the city walls. Then Kuber would assault Thessaloniki from the outside, and the Bulgars inside take care of the garrisons. Basically, Maurus was the Trojan horse. According to Byzantine sources, Maurus is described as highly intelligent and very competent, knowing many languages, including Greek and Latin. The Byzantines were convinced that he would be leading an uprising against Kuber, and Justinian II, the Byzantine emperor, gave him the authority to save the people fleeing from Kuber's Bulgaria, which, let me remind you, was a big hoax only intended to get many Bulgars inside of the city walls. Maurus was given the title of consul, and the Bulgars he brought into the city walls were enlisted into the Byzantine army, allegedly getting high salaries. This uprising was supposed to take place on the night before Easter, when most of the locals would be in churches or celebrating out on the streets. Eventually the Byzantines found out about this plot, but they didn't do too much about it, fearing that arresting Maurus would only boost his popularity, and Kuber might take the city again, just his plans would be altered. Justinian II was told about this, and he ordered one of his navy admirals to patrol the city during the Easter night, and Maurus knew that his plan had basically failed, so this attempt to seize Thessaloniki was never actually initiated. It's unknown what happened to Kuber's Bulgaria after that, as his name disappeared from most sources and likely his nation just collapsed into anarchy. When Danubian Bulgaria expanded into these lands, it's theorized that some of Kuber's descendants later integrated into the Bulgarian political elite, hence why I believe that cooperation would be very possible between the two states. Now, how do we make Kuber's Bulgaria seize Thessaloniki and thus establish a Bulgar Khanate in the Macedonian region, or a second Bulgaria in the Balkans? Well, as we are dealing with the early Middle Ages, we cannot know what happened in Thessaloniki and why this exactly failed. Kuber obviously had a lot of spies in the city and infiltrated it with agents, where he hoped to cause an uprising within the city walls, making it easier for him to take it. So in this alternate history, I would have this uprising to actually be carried out, and for the Byzantines to not find out about this plot and betrayal in time. I would suggest that the Byzantines would have a bit more trouble with the Umayyad Caliphate and the Slavs, which historically occupied most of their attention, possibly leading for them to neglect Maurus. In this alternate history, Maurus is still a consul in Thessaloniki, and many Bulgars would be loyal to him, while being in the Byzantine army and collecting a premium paycheck. The night of Easter 685, this plan would be carried out, and as I mentioned earlier, how taking the city was vital for Kuber's Bulgaria to succeed. So even if it is unrealistic that these Bulgar rebels successfully take the second largest Byzantine city, it has to happen for this scenario to succeed. Inside the city walls, the Bulgars would cause chaos from within, while Kuber's army marches on the outside and besieges Thessaloniki. The Byzantine navy wouldn't be able to respond in time due to the Trojan horse inside of the city. Thessaloniki now falls to Kuber's Bulgaria, which becomes their new capital city and administrative center. Many Slavs of the Byzantine Empire could settle in there, which would centralize power in Kuber's Bulgaria, rather than for them to remain under Byzantine or Avar authority. What is interesting is that Kuber's Bulgaria could actually become more successful and wealthy than Asparuh's Bulgaria, which was the historic Bulgaria, and this is because of taxation and administration. Kuber can now levy heavy taxes to Thessaloniki's existing Byzantine system, while Asparuh in Danubian Bulgaria had a rural and tribal structure, lacking a strong administrative center. Kuber and Asparuh are brothers, remember, so I can see them to cooperate heavily with each other. We can see Bulgaria to become more so-ruled as a dual monarchy, with each ruling their own portion, but collaborating in terms of trade, army and arrange political marriages between each other. After the deaths of Kuber and Asparuh, I see the two Bulgarias to actually unite into one, or it could happen after another generation, but I'd say it's mostly inevitable. Now the Byzantines are of course not going to be so happy about this, actually no, they'll be furious and want to retaliate, but with the Umayyad Caliphate threatening Anatolia, which was more valuable than Bulgaria, the Byzantines would sign peace treaties and focus east. Bulgaria in the Balkans is now in a really good position to dominate the peninsula, as likely Slavic tribes would pledge allegiance to them in exchange for protection. Again, the Slavs are not going to work with the Byzantines or the Avars, so out of the process of elimination, a lot would choose to side with Bulgaria. Theophanes the Confessor historically wrote that the Bulgars became the masters of the Slavs. Even historically there was a Slavic union, called the Seven Slavic Tribes, who pledged allegiance to Asparuh's Bulgaria. All this would happen in this alternate history, but with the Slavs in the whole Balkans flocking to Bulgaria for protection. Further, if the Umayyad Caliphate sees Bulgaria as a counterweight to Byzantium, cooperation between the two states would increase greatly. And with Bulgaria now having access to the Aegean Sea, they can trade with each other, or Bulgaria could receive gold or advisors from the Muslims, only bolstering their situation. From 692 to 718, the Byzantines would be busy fighting against the Arabs, almost constantly for a duration of 26 years, giving Bulgaria some more breathing room and a possible way to expand, mostly north, west of the Dnipro River, and reaching their ancestral homeland. Now we have made one of Bulgaria's expeditions succeed, but there is a lot more to cover, namely the one in Italy, Armenia, but I also want to cover the Bulgars in Khazaria and Volga Bulgaria. Now Alcek's Bulgaria was right next to Kuber's Bulgaria, which was in the Pannonian Basin, in between the Sava, Drina and Danube rivers, occupying lands of the ancient city of Sirmium. It is alleged but not likely known that Alcek moved to Bavaria due to our pressure, which is the same reason as to why Kuber left and went to Macedonia, where Alcek would ask the French king Dagobert I for land to settle in. This was granted, but one night the Franks slaughtered these people, where out of 9,000 only 700 remained. We don't fully know if this was actually Alcek's Bulgaria or not, but we would assume that it is. Historically, he originally settled near Ravenna, where the Lombard king Grimoald I saw them as allies and allowed them to settle in his kingdom, but later ordered them to populate the south of Italy, mainly the Molise region. There the Bulgars occupied the spacious but until that time deserted towns of Sepino, Isernia and Buyano, with the latter two being theorized that their city names derives from Bulgarian language. Since the Alcek's expedition had around 1,000 people, they couldn't become a major political force and became clients of the Lombards, and were forced to become client states of the Lombards from the very beginning, likely being stationed south as to protect against Byzantine incursions into the peninsula. The Bulgars there basically served as a garrison community. Further, this Bulgaria was too dependent on the Lombards, so if they acted out of line, they could be invaded and destroyed. It's unknown how exactly this expedition failed, but according to most sources, the people there just assimilated over the years. Even though initially they reserved their Bulgar identity, they spoke Latin and refrained from using their own language in the 8th and 9th centuries. As a curious fact, this Bulgar influence in the south of Italy is still very present today, as on the 8th of June 2018, a monument of Alcek was erected in the town of Celedi, Bulgaria, while the nearby mountain is called Monte Bulgaria. The Bulgarian sources claim that further many Italian surnames in the region are related to Bulgaria, with a few examples that are given are Bulgurucini, Bulgarini, Bulgarele, Bulgaro and Bulgari. Let me know if this is actually true or not. Because we don't know why this expedition failed, it would be very difficult to know how we can make it succeed, but I have a few ideas. If it is true that 8,300 of Alcek's people were massacred by the French and only a few hundred or a few thousand made it into the south of Italy, then if this massacre is avoided, there would be about 10 times more Bulgars settling in the south of Italy, which could make them establish a country, although initially they would be subjects to the Lombard kingdom. This is possible as in the Duchy of Benevento, which was a Lombard possession disconnected from their northern holdings, the Lombards had their hand to be forced to give them more autonomy, which would include Alcek's Bulgaria in its alternate history as well. The Lombard kingdom would get weakened inevitably due to Charlemagne's conquest of it, which would pave the way for Alcek's Bulgaria to rise and perhaps take the Duchy of Benevento. The Byzantines would still be present in the south of Italy, but I already covered how their situation would be worse due to Kuber's Bulgaria succeeding and likely uniting with Asparuk's Bulgaria, while the Byzantines would be constantly fighting the Muslims. What we have here is the establishment of an independent Bulgar state in the south of Italy, which is likely going to have a lot of connection with Bulgaria in the Balkans, but for the two to actually unite is quite unlikely at this point, as the differences between them would be immense. Alcek's Bulgaria is mostly not Slavic at all, while the one in the Balkans would embrace the Slavic traditions. Still, the two would share the same heritage, as Asparuk, Alcek and Kuber would be all brothers, but due to geography, don't expect a full union just yet. What they have in common is that the Byzantine Empire is in their way of expansion, so this scenario would be quite destructive for the Byzantines. Finally, I want to briefly cover Vund Bulgaria, an alleged attempt to make a Bulgar state in Armenia, specifically near Lake Van. There was likely a Bulgar leader called Vund that led this expedition that eventually settled in these very fertile lands, likely getting their name from the Bulgar leader or vice versa. It is all very disputed. What might have happened to Vund Bulgaria is similar to Alcek's expedition. They just weren't too numerous enough to make a sovereign state, and instead they joined the Armenian nobility and eventually were assimilated. Vund Bulgaria succeeding would be the hardest one to happen, due to them being surrounded by stronger states like Sasanian Persia, Byzantium and regional Armenian kingdoms. Further, this one succeeding would not only be the hardest but also the least impactful, as it's nowhere close to the other Bulgarias, so eventually they would be destroyed, even if they're formed. For the purpose of this alternate history, let us say that the Bulgar state is established here, but it wouldn't last any longer, as the Byzantines would take the region eventually. What this changes here is that Bulgaria would actually have a strong casus belli against Byzantium and claim these lands, especially if there is a royal marriage between Vund Bulgaria and Danubian Bulgaria. With that, we have made all Bulgarian expeditions to succeed, and this is how their territory would look like in the year of 700, where Kuber and Asparuk's Bulgaria are potentially not unified just yet. In the year of 705, Khan Tervel of Bulgaria would still help the Byzantine Emperor come to power, where together they besieged Constantinople and succeeded. Justinian II would still award Tervel with the title of Caesar. Bulgaria was also awarded plenty of gold and resources due to their participation in supporting Justinian II in the Byzantine Civil War, but it isn't exactly known how much this was helpful to Bulgaria. Historically, the Byzantines awarded the Bulgarians the Zagore region, which in this alternate history could be extended to the Pyrenean Mountains, just so the two Bulgarias could actually have a land connection, later paving the way for their full unification. As to simplify this, I would have them to unite right now, but realistically it would happen 50 years past this point. Volga Bulgaria, Black Bulgar and Alcek's Bulgaria wouldn't see any real changes in the beginning of the century, as Alcek's Bulgaria is still under the Lombard kingdom as a vassal state, where a century from now they would free themselves when Charlemagne would conquer the Lombards, but I will talk about this a bit later, as I want to keep it in a chronological order. 717 would be a big year, as the Umayyad Caliphate almost got the city of the world's desire. Historically, Bulgaria sided with Byzantium, which was their rival at the time. The reason why is a bit unclear, but it's speculated that Bulgaria would have preferred to have Byzantium as their enemy, rather than the Muslims, to which they didn't know a lot about. This would officially break the Bulgarian-Umayyad alliance, if there was any, and all Umayyad advisors to Bulgaria would most likely be executed. Historically, the siege of Constantinople from 717 to 718 failed, and Caesar Tervel was credited by the Pope as the savior of Europe. Basically, what happened is that the Byzantines lacked a strong army, but their navy was among the strongest in the world. The Bulgarians arrived at Constantinople, but instead of trying to take the city, they helped Byzantium out with the Bulgarian land army, which is credited as killing roughly 25,000 Umayyad soldiers, forcing their retreat and later surrender. After the war, the Bulgarian state didn't gain any new territories historically, and even in this alternate history, but there would be plenty of benefits for Bulgaria. For example, the Byzantine-Bulgarian Treaty of 716 would be reaffirmed, where the Byzantines would recognize all Bulgarian lands. Regular trade would be established between the two states, and it also ensured annual tribute from Byzantium to Bulgaria, but again, we don't know how much this really was. The most important thing that Bulgaria secured was peace to the south of their country, as they would fight a war with the Byzantines about 8 years later, so for a whole 80 years the Balkans were uncharacteristically peaceful. This allowed Bulgaria to focus north, and I want to touch upon that. I don't think I can explain how important Thessaloniki actually is for Bulgaria. As I said earlier, the Bulgarian state was mostly rural, and their capital of Pliska was nothing special. Now with them having such a highly advanced city, they can inherit so much from it, making the Bulgarian cities way more advanced than historically, which would further centralize power and allow for Bulgaria to tax more efficiently. The Byzantine institutions would also mostly be stolen and applied to the whole of Bulgaria, which did happen historically, but here it would happen a lot sooner and quicker. So although this alternate Bulgaria just 50 years after we started the scenario looks similar to our history, the main difference for now would be internal: more literacy, more taxes for a larger army, more control over the Slavic tribes, more prestige and more legitimacy. For about 8 years after this, Bulgaria didn't engage in any major wars, but they did slowly expand their settlements and territory, allying with more Slavic tribes to their cause, which would butterfly greatly down the line. In 774, the kingdom of the Lombards would collapse due to the Franks invading them, which, as I said in the Alcek Bulgaria section of the video, would allow them to become independent. And since Bulgaria and the Balkans has had Thessaloniki for about a century, trade and mutual support between the two would be really high. I can see for an eventual political union to happen between these two nations, creating a gigantic Bulgaria that would have lands in the south of Italy, likely bordering the Papal States and Byzantium. It is here I want to mention something really interesting about the Bulgars. Historically, where they went, they sought to assimilate, as despite them being by Turkic origin, the first Bulgarian Empire became mostly Slavic, and later the rulers of Bulgaria were Slavs themselves. Basically, they assimilated wherever they went. This means that there could be some cultural differences between Bulgaria in south of Italy and the one in the Balkans, as the one in Italy wouldn't be Slavic in any way, but I don't think this would change in the eventual unification of the two. For example, Danubian Bulgaria and Volga Bulgaria were reported by Arab merchants to be quite similar to the 10th century, which is about 3 centuries after they separated and left out Great Bulgaria. This makes me think that in just 100 years in the early Middle Ages, the two would be still somewhat similar, but I can see the Bulgarian Italy to surely gain some more autonomy, not just because of demographic differences, but also due to geography and how difficult it would be for it to be centrally governed. For now, I'm going to cover them as a puppet government that I would use for Bulgaria. The Avar Khaganate would also be mostly damaged by the great expansion of the Franks, which later would allow Bulgaria in 804 to successfully invade and subjugate the remainder of them, under Khan Krum, who would become a big deal. The Byzantines at the time wouldn't be doing too great. They had religious issues like the iconoclast controversy, but also there were many coups against the emperors, as they just came and went, so there is almost no stability in Byzantium. In 809, Bulgaria led by Khan Krum decided to seize this opportunity with the goal of gaining Serdica, which is modern-day Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria. Serdica was important as it was a major fortification in the region, which would have allowed Bulgaria to take the rest of Western Balkans if they controlled Serdica, linking the Danube to the Adriatic, but also protecting their Macedonian holdings, which at this point would be still very geographically vulnerable. But Byzantium didn't have a chance to exploit this Bulgarian weakness due to the earlier mentioned issues, but the fact that Bulgaria also helped Byzantium out against the Arabs, where they secured peace treaties. Khan Krum would decide that now is the right time to strike and weaken their long-term rival, as the Byzantines would still be very busy with the Arabs raiding in Anatolia, while there were plenty of internal rebellions, and the garrisons left in the Balkans were very underpaid with low morale, and their loyalty to Constantinople was very thin, so Bulgaria thought that this would be an easy victory. Almost right after the war had started, Khan Krum seized Serdica and massacred the Byzantine garrison of 6,000 soldiers, as a way to terrorize the Byzantines and discourage them from further resistance. Emperor Nikephoros I of Byzantium historically personally led an army to the Bulgarian capital city of Pliska, but in this alternate history I think they would want to track Thessaloniki instead, which although not the Bulgarian capital would be much more valuable. The problem is that historically, after the Byzantines sacked Pliska, they retreated through the Balkan mountains, where the Bulgarians ambushed them in the Battle of Vrbica Pass. There the Byzantine army was almost fully destroyed, and Emperor Nikephoros I was killed in battle, where famously Khan Krum had his skull be casted in gold and silver, which he later used as a drinking cup. Now this is very badass, not gonna lie. I mentioned how Byzantium was changing emperors left and right, and now they had lost yet another emperor. Staurakios, the son of Nikephoros I, would take charge, but he was wounded after the Pliska campaign, so he would be forced to abdicate in just 2 months and 4 days after being crowned emperor, where he later died in a monastery. Michael I would succeed him, but after a bit less than 2 years, Leo V would lead a revolt against him and become emperor himself. In 7.5 years, Leo V would be murdered by a conspiracy led by Markel the Amorian, who then would become emperor of Byzantium. To say that the killing of Nikephoros I caused a succession crisis in Byzantium would be an understatement. In 812, the Byzantines would be very weak, practically not having an emperor during wartime. Now, do you see this Black Sea exclave? Well, Khan Krum saw this as well, and captured Mesembria, one of the most vital port cities on the coastline. By 813, the Bulgarians would be on the outskirts of Constantinople, getting ready to take the city. At this point, the Byzantines tried to sue for peace, to which Khan Krum attended. But the Byzantines attempted to assassinate him, which only made him more furious and seeking for more revenge. He set his sights on taking the city of the world's desire in 814. The problem is that in April of the same year he died suddenly, with a stroke being credited as the cause of death, so when Khan Murtak succeeded him, he opted to sign a peace treaty with the Byzantines and keep their gains, while Byzantine cities in Thrace were looted and enriched the Bulgarians and aided in their reconstruction of Pliska. Now in this alternate history I think that a lot would change. This time the Byzantines led by Nikephoros I would attempt to take Thessaloniki instead of Pliska, as it was more valuable, to which they are also going to fail, considering how the Byzantines barely had any victories for the duration of this war. Nikephoros I would still be murdered when he attempts to retreat, and the succession crisis would cripple Byzantium. All of the pillaging of Thrace would still happen, enriching Bulgaria, where they would take Adrianople and deport all of the citizens across the Danube River, including the parents of the future Byzantine Emperor Basil I. Archodiopolis would also be taken, in addition to 50,000 prisoners, but here is the catch. Since the army of Khan Krum in this alternate history would be in Thrace, they are unlikely to go north just to besiege Mesembria, but they are still going to march on Constantinople, where Krum would survive the assassination attempt like historically. As we know from our history, his life would be on a timer, but we have extended it by about 6 months by him not going to Macedonia and wasting time there. Historically, Khan Krum had inspected the city walls of Constantinople and deemed them to be impenetrable, so the winter before his attempted siege, it is rumored that he had started the creation of multiple artillery pieces that would be carried out on 5,000 wagons, also known as a shit ton. He was trying to take the city by force, but since he died in April, he had no opportunity, but here it's not the case. The world is really altered by Bulgaria getting Thessaloniki so early on, as in the early medieval era, these cities were vital, so we have likely changed Bulgaria for the better, where now they would also have a small navy, which means that they can try to assault Constantinople on sea as well, not just land. For the purpose of this alternate history, which let's admit it is very unrealistic, which would be evident by Bulgaria having lands in south of Italy, I would have the siege on Constantinople to be carried out, and if the rumors were true of these artillery pieces, they would likely break the defenses of the city, while the Bulgarian navy would prevent any resupplies. Khan Krum would die during battle, which I think would only bolster the morale of the Bulgarian soldiers, vying to take the city and name it after him. For the sake of this alternate history, I would have this to be a success. The Byzantines just lacked any victories, any real allies, were constantly attacked by the Arabs in Anatolia, and the succession crisis was a big deal. Their coffers were also running dry, and the soldiers were underpaid greatly, so I can see them to surrender. Remember that Khan Krum had brutally murdered the entire garrison of 6,000 people in Serdica, which would make the already disorganized Byzantine soldiers with low morale guarding Constantinople want to lay down their arms and save themselves. It would all seem that we have set up this scenario for Bulgaria to succeed in this, so Constantinople would fall and Khamon Urtak would succeed Khan Krum and sign a brutal peace treaty. Historically, Bulgaria only took Serdica and Mesembria, but now they can take so much more. All of Thrace would be taken, including Adrianople, which is one of the major Byzantine cities. Constantinople will likely become a tributary-paying vassal state or a puppet state to Bulgaria, where a Bulgarian-friendly puppet emperor would be installed there, and since there was a big succession crisis ongoing in Byzantium, finding one and arranging a royal marriage would be quite easy to be achieved. Byzantium would also have to pay further tribute to Bulgaria for the foreseeable future and recognize all the newly gained territories, which is a big deal. I can also see Bulgaria to expand in the south of Italy, potentially seizing off the Byzantine lands there. Now the consequences for Bulgaria winning this war so hard are very massive. They are the undisputed strongest power in the Balkans, they would dominate the Black Sea and probably the Eastern Mediterranean, which means a lot more trade and wealth going to Bulgaria instead of Byzantium. The Byzantines are likely going to remain a room state in Asia Minor and parts of Greece, where I can see devastating losses to cause them even more internal trouble and civil wars. In the decades thereafter, Bulgaria would expand in the Balkans like historically, where under Boris I they would achieve their golden age, but also likely accept Christianity, most likely Orthodoxy, where they would claim to be the successors of the Byzantine Church, and in reality their claim for this is not terrible. Bulgaria would not only have these borders in about 869, as further I think that due to the Khazars being on the decline and collapsing not so long after that this alternate Bulgaria can actually claim the lands of old Great Bulgaria. There would be some major differences between the two here, as Bulgaria is Christian while these conquered lands would likely be still pagan, but also they would have been separated for almost 200 years, where the differences now would just start to show, but since this is the medieval times, this wouldn't be a problem for now. Just so you know, about this time the Bulgars in Volga Bulgaria would most likely become Muslim like historically. Due to the Khazars occupying so much land in influence, communication between Bulgaria and Volga Bulgaria would be minimal, due to the thousands of kilometers of hostile steppe lands that needed to be traversed. While Bulgaria expanding into Volga Bulgaria would be cool, I don't see a realistic way for this to happen, so I would have the two to go their own separate ways. Going into the 900s, the Bulgarian state would initially suffer a defeat by Serbia, but in the Fourth Bulgarian-Byzantine War, the Bulgarians are likely going to get all possessions of Byzantium in the Balkans. Historically, during this war, Bulgaria besieged Constantinople 3 separate times during the war and was almost victorious, so even if you disagree with Bulgaria getting Constantinople in the previous war, them getting in this one, considering that the situation has changed drastically, I think is plausible. Regardless, Bulgaria would come out on top, where they would expand, but not take the Peloponnese Peninsula. Historically, Bulgaria was on 3 seas, the Black Sea, the Aegean Sea and the Ionian Sea, which is a big pride for Bulgarian nationalism today, but in this alternate history, Bulgaria has 2 more, the Tiranic Sea and the Adriatic Sea, due to their possessions in the south of Italy. In the Third Bulgarian-Serbian War, the Serbian kingdom would be subjugated to Bulgaria, where most of it would be annexed, suffering a complete defeat, and all of this happened historically and would happen here as well. Historically, this Bulgarian empire came crashing down as quickly as it was built, where just 100 years past this point they were entirely conquered by the Byzantines that made a comeback. The thing in this alternate history is that Byzantium has been mostly neutralized as a threat, but the Kievan Rus, Hungarians, Serbians and Croats most likely become the new rivals of Bulgaria and destabilize the country from within. While Bulgaria wouldn't fall to Byzantium in this alternate history, in the year of 924 they would have peaked in terms of power and their golden age would likely come to an end. The thing is that Bulgaria likely doesn't cease to exist like historically for 2 centuries, but they could be reduced in size greatly. Still, the Ottomans would find it more hard to come to power in the Balkans due to this massive Bulgaria that would prevent their rise. As you can see, this scenario is becoming fiction at this point, but I would recommend you check out this video regarding Bulgaria joining the Entente in the Great War. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you there. Goodbye.